Hello everyone, thank you for watching this video. Today I'll be building LEGO Star Wars set 40658, the Millennium Falcon holiday diorama. And to spread a little bit more festive cheer, I'll be reading The Tree of Life from the Star Wars Life Day Treasury Book. Holiday stories inspired by a galaxy far, far away, by Cavan Scott and George Mann. I hope the story and the build help you rest and relax this holiday season. Addie Chitcook's head was full of memories of life days past. It was always the same this time of year. He chuckled as he remembered the treehouse buzzing with energy, most of it coming from Lumpawaramp, the little Wookiee shaking the rafters as he jumped up and down in excitement. How many times had Itchy leaned back in his chair, chuckling at his grandson's antics, Lumpy cramming a furry fist into his mouth to stop himself from shrieking in glee as the great day dawned. Had he been the same when he was a cub? Probably. It was so long ago he could barely recall. When Itchy was young, Life Day had been held once every 3 years, as was the cycle of the ancient ones. But Kashyyyk, like much of the galaxy, now celebrated the festival as an annual event. Itchy shook his head. Who would have thought that worlds near and far would adopt Wookiee tradition? Certainly not him, especially during the dark days of the Empire's occupation, when, like most of his clan, he had endured a collar around his neck. Now, though, the light of their humble festival shone brightly for the entire New Republic, providing hope to those who needed it most. He'd even heard that a holographic Tree of Life had been erected in front of a Senate building on faraway Chandrila. Never in his 430 years would he have believed such a thing was possible, but he was old, a relic of days gone by. Even Lumpy was different. The small bundle of energy he had known before the Empire was now almost as tall as his mother, the youthful exuberance replaced by a quiet, withdrawn nature. How Itchy wished things could be as they once were, Lumpy constantly glancing at the door, wondering if his father would come bursting in, home from one of his adventures among the stars. Perhaps this would be the year when Life Day weaved its magic once again, turning back the years. The door slid open. Lumpy didn't even look up from the datapad he held tightly in his hands. The figure in the doorway was not Itchy's son, but dear Malatabuk, who had been searching in the attic for her most prized possession. Was it there? Itchy asked, feeling a quiver of anticipation himself. Marla held up a battered she-shock chest, engraved with the seal of her clan. Right where we left it, thank the Force. Itchy sat forward, hardly believing their luck. After all those years, what do you think, Lumpy? Should we have a look? The young Wookiee didn't reply. Lumpy, Marla said, beaming as if she had recovered the crown of Rook Roro itself. Didn't you hear? I found a crate. Waru, the boy growled. How many times do I have to tell you? My name is Waru. Marla's weary face fell. You always loved being called Lumpy. Your father... My father is not here. The boy's words stung. It was true. His father, Itchy's beloved son, was off-world. And for good reason. He and his friends were helping rebuild a republic greater than it had ever been. He came back whenever he could, as was the way of things, especially on Kashyyyk. A Wookiee's life was long, and there would be time enough for Lumpa Warump and Chewbacca. Why couldn't Waru understand that? Lumpy would have. The look on Marla's face was enough to break Itchy's heart all over again. Well, let's have a look, he said to her, beckoning her over with a kind smile. Swallowing back her sadness, Marla crossed the room and knelt on the rook grass rug in front of Itchy's chair. He leaned forward as she reverently lifted the lid. The hinges creaked, and Itchy glanced up at his grandson. Had Waru's eyes flicked to the box? He was sure they had, just for a second. They're all here, Marla breathed, looking down at the neat bundles, wrapped in cocoa leaves. You always cared for them, Itchy said. Waru, will you help? They both waited, seeing what the boy would do. His gaze flickered from his screen to the chest, and with a sigh, he finally put down the datapad and pushed himself up, then lumbered to his mother's side. Kneeling beside her, the young Wookiee thrust a hand into the wooden box, but Marla stopped him, gently grabbing his fingers before he could cause any damage. Careful now, she said. These are delicate, remember? Waru snatched his fingers back. I'm sorry, For a moment there was a flash of who he had been long ago. The excited little boy, desperate to see beneath the leaves. And then it was gone, replaced by the sullen mask he'd been wearing since they had returned to their treetop home. It's fine. They're fine. Look. One by one, Marla lifted the bundles from the chest, moving the slit vines she had used as string and unwrapping the precious packages. She laid them gently on the rug, a modest but beautiful collection of glass orbs. Each had a light set at its centre. Itchy remembered telling Waru how the lights represented the loom bugs that had swarmed from the Tree of Life, when it was just a sapling, forming the stars above. How he had hung upon the words. Stories passed down from generation to generation, just as the collection of orbs had grown over time, each representing a memory in their family's long history. Most of them would soon be hung around the treehouse, but the largest and most beautiful of all would be hung from a bough of the great tree during the grand procession, the culmination of Life Day celebrations. The three of them fell silent as Marla carefully retrieved the large orb from the bottom of the chest. It had lost none of its luster over the years, its glass frosted and etched with intricate bouquet flowers. "Do you want to hold it?" Marla asked, offering it to her son, but Waru shook his shaggy head. "No, I'll only break it." "You won't," she insisted. "I trust you." "You know that, don't you?" The boy pulled back, looking away. "It's for the best." "Waru," Ichi began, but Marla shook her head subtly, mouthing to the old Wookiee that it was all right. She stood, carrying the most precious of the orbs to the special holder, but waited at the center of a large table that Ichi had carved long ago. Ichi's spine cracked as he pushed himself up, leaning heavily on his cane. Arosha tapped on the floor as he crossed to Marla's side, his daughter-in-law tenderly wiping a speck of non-existent dust from the ornament. He could guess what she was thinking, remembering her mother, Jafloya, now long since gone to rest, who had made the orb when Marla was younger than Waru was now. Ichi placed a hand on her shoulder, and Marla reached up, patting it gently. They turned to see Waru still kneeling beside the chest, staring intently at the remaining orbs. "Will Father be joining us for Life Day?" he asked softly. "Perhaps. If the ancestors will it. He is doing great work." Waru's face darkened. "On the Falcon. Wherever he is, he'll be thinking of us, I'm sure." Waru didn't answer, retreating back to where he had been sitting. Before they could say anything more, the datapad was back on, and the boy was lost to the rest of the conversation. Marla started to go to him, but Ichi caught her arm. "Leave him. The procession will start soon. He'll come around, I promise." He could tell Marla wasn't so sure. Snow was falling as the family joined the great procession through the forest, the united clans of Rook-Roro singing the songs of celebration, moss-covered torches lighting the way. Waru trudged behind Marla, and Ichi hobbled nearby, leaning heavily on his cane. The other families surrounded them, draped in their simple but pristine robes, while the animals of the forest watched from the canopy above. Foss shriekers, tree burrowers, and even a horn-faced Catan. It was exactly how Waru had expected, everyone clutching their family relics, their own orb held fast in his mother's hands. As they approached the sacred grove, the families waited patiently in line to hang their offering on the mighty rusha that represented the mythical tree from which all life sprung. Waru kicked the foot of his crimson robe as Marla stepped forward, adding their decoration to the multitude of glittering orbs before bowing deeply in gratitude for the gift of life. Their part in the ritual complete, they joined the other clans in the grove. The tree drums sounded as the Elder of Arboreal Light ascended to the platform before the crowd, her long golden fur braided with dried rui beads, and the beacon of Karl Beth hanging from the curved staff in her hand. The ceremony began, the Elder repeating words that hadn't changed in over 1,000 years. Waru looked at the faces all around him, seeing the hope and contentment as the Wookiees repeated the litany. His mother was the same, grandfather too. Why didn't he feel the way they did? Why didn't his heart beat in time to the ceremonial drums? Why didn't the song lift his spirits? He knew they should. He had been told often how he loved the ceremony as a child, but he could barely remember those days. All he could think about was the time between, when his family had been separated by the Empire, by the war. All at once, he couldn't breathe. His robe felt too tight, the drums were too loud. He had to get away. He turned, pushing through the crowd, not knowing if his mother had noticed, or where he was even going. All he knew was that he needed some space. At last, he was alone. The sounds of the ceremony drifting through the leaves. He threw off his robe, trying to catch his breath, and looked up, seeing where his panic had led him. He was standing beneath a great bough, their family orb hanging within reach. He told his mother he didn't need to hold it. But that wasn't true. If he did, if he turned the etched glass over in his hands, would he remember? Would he see the faces of long ago reflected in its surface? Perhaps then he could be part of all this again. Perhaps he could share the joy. He reached up, his fingers touching the frosted glass. It was warmer than he'd expected, the light glowing faintly inside. He turned it over and over, every petal and stem suddenly familiar. He could hear his mother's voice, telling him how the orb was made, his grandfather spinning ancient yarns as he bounced Waru on his knee. He could see his father, smiling, back home from the boom. The tree drums sounded like thunder. Waru jumped, crying out as he hit his head on the low-hanging branch. But that was nothing compared to the wail he gave as the orb slipped from his fingers. The sphere struck the ground before he could even try to catch it, shattering into countless pieces. Only the light remained, flickering in the cold night air. Waru picked it up with shaking fingers as tears dampened the fur on his cheeks. Marla's words echoed in his ears. "I trust you. You know that, don't you?" What had he done? A shadow fell across him. He'd been discovered. But from the familiar scent filling the grove, he knew it wasn't Marla or Itchy. Waru spun around to see an almost impossibly tall Wookiee looming over him. There was no mistaking the kind eyes or the weathered bandolier slung over the broad chest. "Father," Waru said, rooted to the spot. "You're here." Chewbacca, son of Atichitkuk, looked at the shards of glass at their feet before glancing back up at his son. "I didn't mean to. I just needed to hold it for a moment. I just needed to remember." Chewbacca didn't scold his boy. He barely even spoke as he led him away from the ceremony. Waru's mind raced. All that time he'd spent wishing that his father would return for Life Day, knowing why it couldn't happen, but longing for it all the same. And yet this was how it had happened, with broken memories on the ground. No wonder Chewbacca was angry. No wonder he wouldn't speak to his son. Was he waiting for them to be back in the treehouse before he told Waru what he thought of his behaviour, what he thought of him? Waru prepared himself for the argument to come, but instead of climbing the tall Russia tree, Chewbacca marched past their home, continuing deeper into the forest. Where were they going? Their destination became clear as they arrived at the spaceport, where a familiar freighter was cooling in the landing bay, its hull creaking as it acclimatized to Kashyyyk's temperature. Chewie hurried up the boarding ramp, his son following as he strode through winding corridors that Waru had once known so well. "Hey there," someone said as they entered the main hold. Han Solo turned, eyebrows raised as he took in Waru's height. Someone's grown. At any other point, Waru would have smiled to see his father's oldest friend, but now all he could think about was how Marla would feel when she discovered what he'd done. "What's wrong?" Han asked when they didn't reply. "What's going on?" Chewbacca didn't answer. He was too busy rifling through lockers and under the Djarik table. Finally, he looked up, noticing something high in the Falcon ceiling. He reached up and unscrewed a luma bulb, which squeaked like a root mouse as it was removed from its housing. "Hey, we might need that," Han protested. But Chewie handed the bulb over to his son. Waru took it tentatively, turning it over in his hands, in the same way he had his mother's orb. Of course, it was the same size and shape, more or less, although the glass was dusty and scratched from years of use. Biting his lip, Waru took the light he had salvaged from the broken glass and slipped it in the bulb. It flickered in its new home, and for a second Waru thought he saw reflections in the worn surface. Faces he knew from his father's adventures. Smugglers, scoundrels, princesses, and knights. "Care to tell me what's happening?" Han asked. A smile broke out on Waru's face. "We're going to save Life Day." But they were too late. The ceremony had already finished by the time the three of them reached the sacred grove. Worst of all, Marla was on her knees at the foot of a tree, staring at the broken glass. Itchy was beside her, tears in his eyes. They both looked up as Waru approached. "I'm sorry," he began. "I didn't mean to break it. Marla leapt up, pulling him into a hug. "I don't care about the orb. I didn't know where you were. I was so worried." "Don't worry, I wasn't on my own." "Son?" Itchy's voice was heavy with emotion. "You made it back." Marla gasped as the towering figure appeared behind Waru, Chewbacca wrapping his long arms around his family and holding them close. "Careful, you don't want to smash another one," Han said, keeping a respectful distance. Marla stepped back, regarding her son. Another what? Nervously, Waru showed her the luma bulb. It's for the tree. For Life Day. For all of us, Chewbacca said. Waru shrugged. We could always decorate it. I'm sure Uncle Han has something on the Falcon. A laser torch, maybe. Han shrugged, smiling that lopsided grin of his. Who says you need to, kid? I agree, Marla said, stepping back to reveal the bow. Why don't you hang it yourself? Waru swallowed, reaching up and hanging the bulb from the tree. It twirled on the branch, catching the glow of the other decorations. Reflecting all their faces in its glass. Looks pretty good to me, Han commented. Marla agreed. It's perfect. Waru let himself be wrapped up in the arms of his family, laughing as Chewbacca pulled Han into the hug. This was what mattered. Not pretty orbs hung on snow-covered branches, but memories that would last a lifetime. This was Life Day. thank you for watching this video. I hope you're feeling relaxed and rested. I hope you have the happiest of holidays and the merriest of Christmases. And as always, may the Force be with you.